Nocturne, Prologue. I sometimes wonder whether the act of surrender is not one of the greatest of them all, the highest. It is one of the most difficult of all. It is so immensely complicated. It needs real humility and at the same time an absolute belief in one's own essential freedom. It is an act of faith. At the last moments, like all great acts, it is pure risk. From the letters of Catherine Mansfield. My world has become very small. A room with a bed, a chair, and a window with metal bars. The stench of the dirty drain from the shower is filling my nostrils. There's no solace from it and nowhere to escape to. I turn my mind outwards, trying to imagine the world beyond the antechamber's two closed doors that separate me from a different, more pleasant reality. Lying back and looking at the ceiling, I wonder if it will be the last thing I will ever see. Younger than John Keats, who knew he was dying on seeing the red arterial blood in his handkerchief. Youth truly is spectre-thin and pale, and by all accounts, I am going to die. The doctor had told me, so it must be true. There's little, it seems, I can do. Powerless. I close my eyes and my mind wanders somewhere between consciousness and sleep. I now understand, like millions before me, why they used to call tuberculosis consumption. Ravaged by fever and drenched in sweat, I can feel my life ebbing away and being gently soaked up by the sheets that I lie in. Unlike the solitude one chooses, my isolation has been forced upon me. There is no choice in the matter. It is for your protection that I must remain separate from you. The days no longer have a beginning or an end, melding together. I wake to find myself in the same place again, feeling like it's someone else's life and not my own. A surge of the fear of dying, the only punctuation in what essentially is the same moment in time over and over. I do nothing except write, and I go nowhere except for the sanctuary of my diary. I can see the fear in their eyes as they try to breathe with waspish breaths inside the orange face masks meant to protect them from me. Only in my dreams do I escape them, these people with faces I never see. But the waking hours seem crueler than they are. The clock on the wall laboriously ticks without me counting the seconds that go by. But I can feel the space in between each one as the tuberculosis bacilli take advantage of those mounting gaps, replicating slowly inside me. Does true surrender come when one admits that death is as natural as being born? What do you want of me, says the host. With me surely you shall die too. One thing is certain in all of this, and is clear to me now. We humans are united in the air that we breathe, whatever our differences, and ultimately in death, whenever that comes. The great equalizer. How does a young man, only 24 years old, accept the inevitability of his death, hostage to a disease that has already stalked the world for thousands of years, and has taken some of humanity's finest? Stripping away everything until the host, finally ethereally pale, a shadow of how they used to be, becomes translucent in physicality and spirit, before finally and begrudgingly letting go of his soul. I am not ready for the most final of acts, that of surrender. I just can't. I don't want to die. 5 years before, on September the 3rd, 1990, I was diagnosed HIV positive. It was not a good day to be diagnosed, not that any given day is. It was the day that Florida dentist David Acer died. He infamously had infected 5 of his patients, including a 16-year-old girl with the virus. They were either already dead or dying. The public were frightened. Could it really be possible that those we entrusted with our lives, who were supposed to care for us, might potentially transmit a disease that could kill us? I was a student nurse back then, young, starting out in life and learning the skills for a future that feels now to have been snatched away from me. Needless to say, being diagnosed HIV positive was the end of my nursing career. I would care for no one professionally again. And it was my turn to take the place of the patient and be cared for by the professionals. Like the public, whatever that word means in its loosest term, I didn't think that the actions of those to whom I'd entrusted my care would have led me to being infected with a disease that could kill me. Led me to the predicament I find myself in now within these walls, isolated in this room. The bacterial bouquet grown in a petri dish may well have excited the observer in his or her white coat as he or she looked at it through his microscope. But does that excitement, their interest in me as a disease, not as a person, mean anything to anyone but them? Only a few years after being diagnosed HIV positive, I was becoming ill and my admissions to hospital were becoming more frequent. It was during one of these days that I became infected with MDR-TB. The prognosis for me is not good. I was told that most HIV positive people who have MDR-TB usually die. My doctor thinks I may only have 3 months to live. I, like you, probably, thought that TB had been eradicated. Not so. Humanity's triumph over the microbe and the miracle of antibiotics was short-lived, it seems. TB, in my mind, belonged to a time more than a century ago when famous writers experimented with opiates and drank absinthe into the dream-addled oblivion. It's a fact that I'm sure you won't dispute. Literature is scattered with the great works of consumptive writers. There was a time when if a writer wasn't consumptive, then he or she really couldn't be taken seriously. They just weren't pale and interesting enough. At least I have that credential, if nothing else. Keeping in mind that the written works of those who are inspired to write because they were consumptive tend to hang around for some time. Like I say, you may have heard of Keats, the Brontes, Mansfield, etc., right? I shan't labour the point. I feel it important to explain something to you. After all, I could be dead as you read this, and I'd hate to seem so self-referential as to compare myself to those great writers. They lived in seemingly more romantic times, enhanced strangely by TB, and pioneers, if you will, of the consumptive art form. No, the link between those writers and me is keeping a diary. For me, it's the place where I go to externalize the contents of my mind and imagination, allowing it to wander freely, and now it seems to make sense of the tragedy of a life cut short. Those masked jailers caring for me have shut the door and are waiting for me to drown on the bloody contents of my lungs. Is it too late? The realization that I've already wasted enough time waiting to die? It's been several years since my HIV diagnosis. Now I realize that I should have lived those years, not in fear but in liberty and freedom, not experiencing repeatedly the pain of my past, but enjoying the world around me, my friends, my lovers, and those who truly care about me. What now? What can I do in such a short future? There's no time left for regrets. I wake from the dampness of my night sweat. At least, I think I have. I'm a bit more lucid now. I had a dream. I dreamt that everything I'd ever written, everything I'd ever said, thought or done was documented on a long tape of thin white paper. The thin paper ribbon hung out of my mouth, and I started to pull it out. Out with it came piles of tape which started to form on the floor as I continued to tug away at it. I did this for a long time, and then the tape snapped. There was still some poking from my lips, and I pulled it again, but this time it wouldn't move. I slid it from side to side in the hope that it would be released and continue to flow, but it would not. I knew there was a lot more down inside me, and I wanted it out. But I feared that if I pulled too hard and the tape snapped further down my throat, I wouldn't be able to draw it out at all. I sat there, not knowing what to do. Everything I knew, consciously or subconsciously, was in there. I had to have courage. I would just have to risk breaking it.